Hey there, and welcome to LOGOS Conversations. This is our second episode in a three-part series on the book of Job. Last time we were with Shad Purcell, a local pastor here in San Antonio. And today I have Chris Georges with me. Chris is a dear friend of mine. In fact, we met kind of before I moved to Texas 7 years ago, but he refused to meet me, actually. And that's a whole nother story.
So I saw you. I don't know if you saw me, because we were getting ready to leave the park, and so I was kind of watching cars and you drove in right when we were leaving. So I was kind of looking for you, and I don't know if you noticed me.
Well, not at all. But in fact, I should give Chris props, because my family was about to transition to Texas in a new role here at First Baptist Church. And Chris and his family knew that I was coming, and they actually called because they were in Virginia, and where my family was living. And we had this brief opportunity to possibly connect, but we couldn't make it work. But I am grateful that you went out of your way to try to.
Actually, we had it was a pretty long conversation with Anna.
That's right.
And she invited us over, you need to come stay the night here with us. And so we're like, whoa. I don't know if I'm ready for that level of commitment.
That's right. Not yet.
Not yet.
All that to say is Chris and I have been friends for about 7 years. Grateful for his friendship. And I've invited Chris in this conversation today because Chris has MS. You have MS. And walking through Job has just brought to my awareness there are people in our church family that are regularly dealing with ongoing stuff that they can't just walk away from. It's a part of their life. And it made me wonder, how are they dealing with Job as Job's walking through his stuff? And I know that Job is suffering to a degree that you haven't experienced, but yet you still have experienced your own suffering over the past few years. So Chris, tell us who you are, what do you do? Talk to us about MS. What is MS?
What is MS? Well, first, I'm a native San Antonio in Countdown City, 210. So I love San Antonio. I grew up here. I've been here the majority of my life, and right now, I'm a traffic engineer with the city of San Antonio. And so one of my jobs is to literally just spend days or, spend a portion of my day just driving the streets of San Antonio. I'm still surprised. I want to say I've been down 99% of every street, but every day, every so often I'll go down the street, I'm like, I've never been to this area of San Antonio. So it really is a big community that we live in, and there's all sorts of different people that live here, and it's enjoyable that I get to be a part of the city, and specifically with traffic, we all have our own traffic problems.
And you can call his number anytime you have traffic issues. It's flashing on the screen now. Right. Just kidding.
Well, actually, if people aren't calling, then they say, well, why are we paying this guy? And so I need people to call me. So I enjoy when people call me, and so it's a nice break in my day. So if you ever have a traffic problem, call 311, say you want to talk to the traffic engineer, and
whoa, there it is, folks.
There it is, and you'll
solution to all of our problems.
Right. No, yeah, and so just starting off and just talking about suffering. Yeah, a lot of us, everybody has had periods of suffering. Sometimes it comes in, sometimes it's just there for a short time. Right. I'm unique, sort of, that my suffering has been a part of my life for a long time now. I was originally diagnosed with MS 3 years into Rebecca and I's marriage. Wow. And so I was 24, 25 at the time. And so, but yeah, we all suffer in different ways. With MS, I kind of have to wear my suffering on the outside. A lot of people suffer on the inside, and you really don't know what's going on with that individual. With me, I have to you can kind of tell that when I have good days, when I have bad days, I don't get to hide it, which can be a blessing at times.
Yeah.
But what is MS? MS it's an autoimmune disease. Basically, my immune system has been attacking my body as I look back on my life, I can kind of see that I'd have these little instances where things didn't feel right, and I guess now that I've had MS for such a long time, I can kind of attribute. I kind of wonder if that thing that happened early in my childhood, if that was just one of the first telltale signs that something wasn't quite right with my body. One of those is baseball. I really don't like baseball, but my parents wanted me to play baseball, and I'm a horrible hitter. I just was never able to connect the ball. And one of the areas that MS often affects somebody is with their vision. I don't know if you've ever been pulled over for a DWI.
No.
You know, the officer will do that test where they have that finger in front of you and you're supposed to follow it.
Yeah.
If you were to do that test on me, you would notice that my eyes don't shift real smoothly with my finger, and they just kind of jitter as they go across. That's a sign that you're intoxicated, and that they will. You could be charged with DWI. For me, I've been pulled over before, and I've had that actually. The officer do that test on me, and I told the officer, I have MS. But the officer wasn't buying it, and so I almost...
He gets that excuse all the time, I'm sure.
So right. But yeah, no, so MS, autoimmune disease, my immune system is actually attacking my body. Specifically, it's the myelin sheath around your nerves. And so my myelin sheath, or I guess the rubber around the nerves, that helps the pulse go from your brain to your muscles. That sheath, that thing that kind of keeps the wire insulated, my body's attacking that.
Okay.
And so that was one of the first signs that led to my diagnosis of MS. It's funny. It's a funny story how I actually got diagnosed with MS. I was working for Pape Dawson Engineers here in San Antonio, Texas. I was working at the office that they were located at 281, right there near the airport. So Rebecca was in med school, so she was busy all the time. So I would oftentimes, I'd work long hours. So my schedule would usually go. I'd go to work at 5 o'clock. I would change into some workout clothes, and I'd run in the neighborhood behind our offices, which just so happens to be this neighborhood. It's the neighborhood behind Chick-fil-A, right there by North Star Mall. And I'd run about 2 miles at 5, and then I'd go back to work and finish up my day. But it was funny when I'd run that little 2-mile loop. There's a particular portion, when I was nearing the back end of it, I would notice that I'd have trouble reading signs, and I can actually picture it today. There was a for sale sign. And as I was running past that house, I would notice, hey, I can't read that for sale sign. I was having this double vision that would happen. Because of that, I ended up going to see an eye doctor. I was like, oh, maybe I need some glasses because I have this crazy double vision. And so I went to go see a couple eye doctors. Of course, I would go in the beginning of the day, when I was pretty fresh. And I wouldn't have the double vision. So I ended up going to about 3 eye doctors. And I tell them my symptoms, that I'm having this double vision. They would do all the tests, and they would say, but we don't see anything. It wasn't until, I think it was the 3rd eye doctor that the eye doctor said, well, you should probably get your brain scanned. And let's just see if that. And I'm very fortunate that person that had the insight to say, hey, what you're telling me are your symptoms, and what I'm seeing aren't lining up. It may be something deeper. And so that originally led to my initial diagnosis of MS.
So Chris, I know, just because I know part of your story, that you were a very active person. You loved playing basketball, among other things, very active in college, and then 3 years into being married, you're diagnosed with MS. Take me back just briefly to those early days of that diagnosis. How did you process all of that back then?
Yeah, and like you said, I've always been a pretty athletic guy. I swam in high school, took 5 years to graduate from college. It's funny, I got to A&M, Rebecca came the year after me, and then she graduated a year before me because I just took a very slow route. I used to like playing basketball at the rec center between 3 and 5 with a group of friends. And so I never took classes at that time. And because of that, it took me a little bit longer to...
So committed to basketball.
So yeah, I am a competitive person. And so, yeah, I enjoyed that. And so it did take me a little bit longer. But all that to say, it's because of my, I guess, athleticism. I was able to compensate as MS started to work its way through my body. So I remember in the early days, well, I remember my first diagnosis and having conversations with a few neurologists. I would get this kind of like, you could tell when I was talking that the physician was uncomfortable telling me that I was diagnosed with MS. At the time, I really didn't know too many. I don't think I knew anybody with MS. No one in my family had MS. So, you'd speak to the physician and they would kind of get kind of calm and like they were unloading this huge thing to me, and I really had no idea. I was still running after work. I was still playing basketball a little bit. Actually, I was playing on Thursday nights here at the church. We'd have an open gym here, and a group of guys would come in from the east side. Yeah, on Thursdays, that was my thing, playing basketball up there. And when I first got diagnosed, not much changed. Although after I got diagnosed, I did start to notice some things. I just thought I was getting older. I was getting older, but I could tell that when playing basketball, that my brain would say, "Hey, Chris, go ahead and cut here," or come off this screen this way, and my brain would say, "Do this," but my legs wouldn't keep up with my body, and so. I think one of the reasons why I got diagnosed so early, because I knew I kind of had a good feel of what my body was capable of doing, and me not being able to do those things kind of led to all this diagnosis. Just like I was saying with the eye doctor, I kind of knew what my body could do, and it caused questions for me when it couldn't do that.
Yeah. So for you early on, you were just kind of pretty I get almost kind of like pretty stubborn, like. I'm not experiencing everything you're describing right now, so I'm just going to keep moving forward, and everything was kind of unknown.
Right.
So it didn't become real until when?
When did it become real? I think it was probably most evident, I think, when we were in Virginia. And so lived in San Antonio pretty much my whole life except for college. After my diagnosis, at the time I had my own company. I had met somebody at a conference, and they asked, "Would you like to move to Virginia Beach?" And Rebecca was getting near the end of her residency, so she was getting ready to enter the workforce and find her first job. And Rebecca and I prayed about it, and we decided, let's go to Virginia Beach for a little bit. So we moved up there. The position I had with the company had us working long hours. And I started to notice that being out in the field so much and having to walk throughout the day, I would notice that my body wouldn't be able to do things that I knew I was able to do. And so I think it started to hit home for real when my day-to-day wasn't able to, I was having to explain to people, or I was having to say no to things because people would start to pick up on my MS. And so I guess that's when it became the most real, when I was starting to lack the ability to hide it. Because normally I could just say, okay, I'm not going to do that, or I'll just do this for a certain amount of time. But when it started to, when I couldn't, I'd have to explain to people, like, "Hey, Chris, people would ask, "Hey, is everything all right?" And I'd have to come up with an excuse because I really didn't want to share with people I had MS. And that's when it started to become, I guess, real for me in that sense.
Yeah, so I guess going back to that question then, well, how did you begin processing that as your MS began to manifest itself more and more? Mm-hmm. What were you thinking and feeling? I mean, we're working through Job, and part of the genre is intentionally to engage with Job's feelings about his own suffering. What were you feeling when MS became real?
For the most part, I think oftentimes when someone is going through suffering, you try to hide it. Not only do I try to hide it to the people that I have to interact with, but I kind of try to want to hide it from myself.
Got it, yeah.
And so for a while, it was just self-medicating myself. My brain and my thought process would go to weird places, and I would distract myself with other things, whether it would be, I don't know, just anything other than thinking about the suffering that was happening, or thinking about the future. Yeah, I would not want to think about it. And so the early days, it was a lot more of how much can I hide it, not only to the people around me, but to myself.
Yeah. Were you asking other questions along the way in those early days?
Every so often, it would really it would hit me hard. I can remember one in the early days of Logos, when it was Scott Lane. It was there in the chapel, and Manny. They would lead the service. I can distinctly remember one of my first big cries. Yeah, it was during a worship service down there, and so yeah, I can. Usually the hardest times were I'd ask myself a question. I'd consider the future, and the question would just keep bouncing back and forth in my head and just not become resolved. And you kind of see this in Job. Even you kind of see him ask these questions, and he doesn't necessarily get an answer. And so, at times in those early days, one thing that I can remember is just having that question and allowing that question just to go back and forth in my head and not really resolve itself. And yeah, it would go 30, 45 minutes, in an hour and a half, that same question would just kind of stick in my head. And as I've been having to live with MS, the questions are still there, but I guess me being comfortable without having a resolution to that question, I'm more comfortable with it. I'm more fine with not having it all tied together.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can remember just imagining what my life would be. In particular, I can remember having thought, when you get married, oh, I can't wait to have kids, and just, oh, I can't wait to take my kid to do this, or, being able to do this. And just, I can remember having these thoughts of, I don't think I'm going to be able to do that. And
yeah.
And so those were the hardest to deal with, when you always had this dream of being able to dream of teaching your kid how to play basketball, and me not being able to not necessarily be the person that does that, and just.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to take a break and do our hot take. So what's our hot take, Catherine?
Debt culture in general. Specifically, should students go to school if debt is overwhelming when they get out?
Should students go to school if they have this mountain of debt? That's a really good one. Yeah. Well, do you have some insights on this, Chris?
I did have Rebecca's grandmother was staying with us this week. She's recovering from a fall. And last night, Lydia and I and Grammar, she was an English teacher, so her nickname is Grammar. We had a conversation, and she explained to us that early in her marriage, both her and her husband decided, hey, we need to finish our degrees. And she quickly said, well, Wayne, we can't do that. We don't have enough money to afford it. But after prayer, they just decided this is what we need to do. And they trusted God that that they would be able to make it through the situation, and they went to school. They had 4 kids at the time. I have no idea how they were able to accomplish that feat.
Yeah.
But if I would say, if you know that God's calling you and is preparing you for college, he'll pull you through the situation.
I think that's exactly the response that needed is wisdom, understanding the costs of education these days, the real value of the vocation you're pursuing, and does it make sense? Is it wise to go into that kind of debt with the kind of vocation that you're pursuing? And it doesn't make financial wise sense to do that. If you're going into debt for 150 grand to complete a degree, but you're getting a degree that really is not going to be able to whittle that debt down, then you might want to think of another option to pursue that same vocation. And here's the cool thing is I think, we've been taught by our culture that you're not anybody unless you have a certain kind of degree. And that's just not true. No. We have entrepreneurs, various vocations that can be trained and equipped in a lot of other ways that you're not having to drop that kind of money, and you can be just as successful. So I think at the end of the day, it's really pursuing, how am I wired? How am I gifted? What's the best, most efficient and effective route to achieve those goals? And can I do it in a responsible, wise, financial way? And seek a lot of counsel. There's a lot of different ways to achieve those goals without accruing just tons and tons of debt.
Yeah, I'm glad that I know when I was growing up, going to college or after high school was very much so. No, you're going to, and I think the conversation has changed for this younger generation that college isn't necessarily something that you have to do to be successful, or that's meant for everybody. And so I'm glad that both parents a lot of parents are getting comfortable with the idea that college may not make sense right now, and maybe it needs to wait a little bit. And
or there's a different route.
Or there's a different route
through college that's not as. There's such great community colleges to where you can save tons of money and still get a quality education and then finish that 4-year degree at another side. Anyway, there's a lot of wise ways to achieve vocational goals without getting through debt. You do not need to put yourself in that kind of position where you're strapped for the next 20, 30 years of your life. So, awesome. Okay, we're going to get back to Job. So let's start talking about Job. As you've mentioned, Job asks a lot of questions without much resolution at this point. Of course, we know God never answers his questions outright anyway. He allows him to sit without resolution, and he's pointing him to just trust my management of the world. But as you've been reading through Job, you're also a teacher in one of our Bible study groups. How has Job been helpful or hurtful in these past few weeks?
Well, I think for me, and I think for a lot of people that have to go through suffering for a long time, or just suffering in general, having the conversation with God, having the conversation with friends, having the conversations with people has always been the best medication.
Interesting, yeah.
For me. And so I guess I've known the story of Job, but it's not till these past few weeks that we've been studying that I realize the importance that these conversations Job has had with his friends, and just how important, and just looking back in my life, how important the conversations I've had. I can think of conversations I've had with you early on, and just the importance of talking through the suffering, not necessarily getting the answers, but just processing it to other people. I know one of the ways that it can be challenging when you're going through suffering is is asking these questions and not being able to talk, to not feel like to have the conversation only in my head. It's only when I have conversations like this or have conversations with people do I feel like I can get some resolution to it, even though the person is not necessarily giving me the answer. By me actually voicing the question, I think I understand my question better. And because I understand my question better, I think I'm more comfortable with not having the answer. It's funny. I had a conversation with with another Sunday school leader last week, actually, and we were talking about. I forget what we were talking about, but we had a conversation a year ago. Actually, it was a conversation at one of the marriage events. It was the food truck. I think it was one of the first events that we had at the church during the pandemic, and we had a conversation. And I remember that just talking to him last week. It kind of reminded me of that conversation, and I remember an answer I gave him, and that answer that I gave him makes sense today, in a weird way. So I was so grateful that I was so grateful that he asked me a particular question. Mm-hmm. I answered him, not fully understanding why I answered that way, but today, and because of Joe, I understand why I answered it. It's weird how conversations...
But all that happened in the context of this conversation with a friend, right? And I mean, it's so unfortunate that Job's friends weren't the kind of comfort that he needed. And they made things worse.
Right.
And but I guess the reality is, in your experience, is one of the ways that you've been able to process where you are in a healthy way is through really great conversations with people. But I know that just based on what you shared, I think, when did you get to a place where you were ready to have those conversations? Because I know you're not always eager to have those conversations about, because MS comes in fits and seasons where you feel like it progresses quickly in a short span of time. But when did you get comfortable with hard conversations?
Even to this day, there are some people that I still haven't necessarily had the conversation with, even though they know exactly. I'm still hesitant to have a conversation with them. I think one part that's important for me is for me to have enough grace in the conversation. And so as I've grown, just my ability to extend grace to other people, to trust people, to extend grace back to me, I think has allowed me to open up about my journey with them. And it's funny. I've had, as I've had more and more conversations with people, I asked myself, why didn't I have this conversation earlier with this person? One, I was afraid that person wouldn't extend me grace. But I think also, I just wasn't ready to extend grace to that other person. And so as I've learned to accept grace and to give grace, the conversations, I've been more bold in my conversations with people.
I think that's a very interesting take that I didn't even consider, that the person in that season of suffering needs to learn how to extend grace to those who don't understand what they're going through. And that's a part of the conversation, is I'm going to extend grace to this person that hasn't shared my experience, maybe is asking questions or saying things that are hurtful, but you extend grace to them. I think that's a powerful word of wisdom for anyone going through suffering. Is maybe part of the journey is learning to extend grace to people who don't know where you are.
Right. And I know that as somebody that can extend grace, knowing the grace that's been extended to me, I just know that I'm better who I'm supposed. I'm more. I'm a better. I'm more who God created to be, as being able to extend grace to other people. So, as much as, it's almost like a thing that makes me better, and I realize I'm a more powerful person. I'm more the person that God created to me in my ability to extend grace to other people, just in the same way God's extended grace to me.
Okay, so this begs another question, and I know we don't have much time left together, and maybe this is one of these unresolved questions, is if you're saying that these conversations, your season of suffering and these conversations and learning how to extend grace is essentially shaping you into the kind of person God wants you to be. Mm-hmm. So are you saying that as you have processed MS in your life, that you feel God is using that to shape you in the person that He wants you to be? I mean, is that the resolution here, walking through Job and your own season of suffering, that God's using this?
Right. I do see the advantage of the suffering. I do. And speaking of this conversation, the answer I had with this person about a year ago, the answer I gave the person was along the lines of, I have a better understanding of how much I don't fit in this world. I mean, the world that we kind of design our lives to have joy, to be comfortable. We're trying to make our little community as or our time here on earth as comfortable as possible for us. And that's one thing that I'm constantly feeling uncomfortable here on this side of heaven. And so I'm constantly more hungry, I guess, for the life not here. And I kind of, yes, and so that's a blessing that I have, that I don't feel
comfortable.
I don't feel comfortable here, and I'm ready for this to. And that's not a perspective that everybody gets to enjoy. So
no, I think that's another powerful takeaway for those in our community who experience suffering, that can teach us a lot about. We shouldn't be comfortable here, right? We should have a longing for the fullness of God's salvation, right? Which means complete and total restoration, which means for you a brand new body, right? And a brand new creation and perfect fellowship with God and with others. We can settle in. This is good for us.
Right.
But it's not comfortable for you.
No, like I said, these questions and these unresolved questions that just kind of bounce in my head. It's just this constant things are not supposed to make sense here, and I know that, and so and other people don't.
But that you just didn't arrive at that overnight, and I know that. But so last question, we're going to be in Job obviously for another 8 weeks, I think. For as much as you've been reading through Job these past 5 weeks, what are one or two takeaways you would want to share with our listeners and viewers right now?
One of the things I'm most impressed in Job. There's a lot of things that are impressive about Job. It's this conversation, this background conversation that God has with the heavenly host and with Satan. He doesn't necessarily get privilege to it, but it's such. I wonder. You can kind of see how proud God was of Job, and Satan probably says, "Hey, this man only likes you because of of this relationship, that they have with you." But Job, when Satan posed the question, God instantly knew. Well, there's this one person. Job is the person that I know, that my relationship with Job, that their relationship was not transactional or, because very much so in that day, and even me today, if God, so life makes more sense if I'm good, I get good things. If I'm bad, I get bad things, and that's how you view life. But the amazing thing about Job is even though he was treated so well, his relationship with God was never based on the good favor that Job kind of found himself in at the beginning, and just wait when it all got taken away, even though the questions were there, his relationship with God, his conversations with God never really stopped, even in the good times or the bad times.
Their tone changed, right? But he
Right.
still was trying to move towards God. And I think that's a profound thought, that his relationship with God was not transactional. And in fact, we see that in Job. He never talks about all the wealth that he lost. He talks about the loss of hearing God, especially this week in chapter 9. But I think that is a very powerful thought to. Chris, I know we could spend a lot more time talking about this, but thank you so much for sharing a little bit of your life experience, your own kind of suffering with MS, and how it's been relating to Job, and how you've been processing Job. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap up our second episode here on Job, and I hope that you captured those nuggets of truth that Chris shared with us about learning how to extend grace to those who aren't where you are in those conversations. The conversations are absolutely essential in processing where you are. And then learning to long for what God has in store for us on the other side of eternity. So thank you, Chris, so much. Hopefully you were encouraged. Hopefully you were blessed as well. Have a great day.